Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It is almost time for Centro Institute's monthly webinar. It looks like there's still some folks that are logging on, so what I'd like to do is maybe give them another minute or two, so please be patient, and we'll get going very shortly. Thank you again for everybody joining us today. All right. Hello, everyone. You are logged into the Centro Institute monthly webinar series. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. Welcome. My name is Ryan Manchi. I lead the Centro Institute, and I am your host for today. If you've got thoughts to share in real time, you can tweet at us at Centro, and don't forget to add the hashtag Centro Institute, which you'll see on many of the slides as well. For today, our presentation is, I'm sure you are all aware, we're going to be talking about the cross-device opportunity. Please know that this presentation, this webinar is being recorded, so after this, later this afternoon, you'll receive an email with a link to be able to check out the on-demand stream as well as review all the slides that we're using. If you do have questions during the presentation, you can submit them in the question tab located on the right side of the webinar app. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through and address those and talk through those and hopefully be able to get through all of them. So Centro, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with and aware, we provide software for digital advertisers. Our technology is designed to boost media, team, and business performance by enabling advertisers, that's you, to be able to plan, buy, analyze campaigns all on a single platform that we call Basis. So our goal is really to empower you all, advertisers, to be able to control the major aspects of transactions with media partners through a centralized and collaborative system. We have an amazing team of media specialists and digital experts who provide our clients with raving fan service at every single stage of the campaign lifecycle. So on our monthly webinar series, we are joined by experts who cover the latest updates on noteworthy digital opportunities and talk about vital changes within the advertising industry and learn best practices for fast-moving marketers, all within 45 minutes or less. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, one of my favorite folks at Centro, not just because I get to work with her on a regular daily basis, but Noor Nasir, who is Centro's Senior Director of Media Innovations and Technology. Noor leads innovation strategy development at Centro, where she helps clients build smarter multi-screen campaigns through the diverse range of offerings available within the digital media landscape. So before she joined Centro, many years ago, I think well over 7 years ago, Noor was responsible for planning and digital activation at Starcom for consumer technology brand BlackBerry and for a little CPG brand called Procter & Gamble. So I'm going to be quiet for now, but I'll join you with the Q&A. So I'm going to hand it over to Noor to talk about the wonderful world of cross-device targeting. Noor.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks to everyone for joining the call today, whether it is your lunch hour, the hour before lunch, or the hour after, depending upon where you're sitting in the country. We appreciate you guys making a little bit of time to get educated on one of the many diverse, interesting areas that is being covered in the digital landscape today. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and talk about what we're looking to cover on today as it relates to this always-on world. So to start off, I'll first go over the progression and importance of having the cross-screen targeting conversation today, and how it continues to matter so much to marketers and advertisers. One thing to just quickly acknowledge is that cross-screen targeting, the technology that exists now, is a little bit different than what it was in the past, but it has already been in existence. So just having that refresher is something of importance to chat through. Next, for you guys who may be less familiar, again, whether you need a refresher or you're completely unacquainted, I'll spend some time talking about how cross-device targeting works. Then we'll look to discuss how to take advantage of the technology. And finally, let's walk through some best practices on how to best manage your expectations and best plan to take advantage of cross-device targeting for what it has to offer. So let's go ahead and get started. Primarily with just this consumer insight, that we need to acknowledge that we are now in a cross-screen world. Consumers today in the US and also globally have a multitude of devices that they tap into on a daily basis, more so than they ever have in the past. And understanding how consumers utilize those devices to connect with brands and advertisers is of the utmost importance for marketers to develop a strong understanding of. So noting that, let's take a look at some recent market research that aligns with this topic at hand. So to start off that discussion, eMarketer released a report earlier this year asking executives what the leading motivations were for taking a people-based marketing approach. And by far and away ahead of the curve of other answers, executives communicated that their number one priority was a motivation to more effectively target consumers. That was voted 20 percentage points ahead of ensuring viewability and reducing fraud, also ahead of the ability to track consumers across the path to purchase, the desire to increase ROI, and also better attributing for sales. So it was ahead of all those other answers. And frankly, it makes a lot of sense. At the heart of advertising, to ensure efficacy of targeting, the very first step you need to take is to reach your desired consumer. Everything else is effectively secondary. Moving right along to another survey, this one released by the IAB and Winterberry Group, also from earlier this year in 2018. Here the survey posed the question of which marketing topics commanded the most attention for marketers and brands. Available topics to select in the survey included artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and concerns about data security, amongst other things. But the most prominent marketing topic selected by 52.3% of respondents in the survey was cross-device audience recognition. So, in fact, cross-device audience recognition was the only survey answer that the majority of surveyed respondents selected as critical and worthy of immediate attention. So, many things, while they may be of interest, there isn't that same degree of certainty and spotlight of focus in terms of just making sure that it's being something that is addressed. So I think the next question is, why is it so important now? So let's get into the specifics of why that is. And that's where the conversation turns to acknowledging what consumer trends are happening as of late that have led to the surge of importance for marketers. So first and foremost is just seeing how many connected devices the average consumer is tapping into on a daily basis now. So one way to frame up the conversation on connected experiences today is on the household level, knowing that often in homes, people have personal connected devices like smartphones and laptops, which are very much personally owned, maybe only uniquely leveraged or utilized by an individual, but oftentimes they also have shared connected devices like, let's say, televisions. So the study I consulted on the home-based level suggested that the average household today has approximately 8.5 connected devices. Now, to me, that number is definitely significant enough to suggest rationale for why marketers are choosing to further investigate how to tap into device experiences. But personally, I think that number is a little low. More on that in a little bit. Now, let's also take a moment to acknowledge that we have what we have going on in the proverbial modern living room of today. So where you kick back and relax in your home and maybe tap into devices that you're using either individually or collectively with other people who live in your household. So if we look at the bar charts on the right, you'll see it's really a mix of portable devices, and I'm calling portable devices ones that we might take out and about for our day, whether it's at work or school or elsewhere, and then also bring back into the home. And then also devices that we specifically and intentionally tap into uniquely while we're in the household. So the average house has a really high propensity to have an assortment of digital devices. So those ones being the ones in the, maybe you want to call them gold or yellow bars, a variety of digital devices that include laptops, desktops, and smartphones. And all those devices are ones that there is a really high propensity for people to have them. So we can see we're close to saturation of households having both a computer and a smartphone almost equally. And then also a very significant number, not quite as prominent as what we're seeing for computers and smartphones, as tablets, with it being about a 66% of households having a tablet as well. Then the secondary piece that we need to acknowledge is how many folks have connected TV experiences or over-the-top box experiences. So here we're looking at OTT devices broken into 3 categories. Again, existing in a lesser capacity to our traditional digital devices, but still growing at a pretty significant rate. So we're breaking it out into 3, I want to say close to equal categories, but ahead in the ranking is streaming boxes. About 40% of households have those. Smart TVs at a little over 30%, and gaming consoles at 29%. So many different ways for us to be connected in today's modern living room. Along the same topic of conversation, I've seen a broad range of studies that are skewing out there on what that number looks like as far as how many connected devices we have. And I think it's because there is also a pretty good likelihood that folks are trying to understand how much more are we planning on being connected in the future in a variety of different ways, and how many devices are we likely to have. So one study that was released by Global Web Index based on numbers for this year was skewing very conservatively and saying that the average individual is likely to have about 4 connected devices. But on the other side of the spectrum, there was this study released by Cisco and reported on by MediaPost, where they said that the average individual will have about 13 connected devices by 2021, and that U.S. adults are spending about 11 hours a day interacting across media. So we have a lot of devices, and we're planning on spending a lot of time across them as well. This is where I think anybody who is on the phone, myself included, you might take a moment to say, I want to take inventory of my own habits and usage. So I'll go ahead and do that survey on myself in my own home where I live by myself. I see I have a smartphone. I just have one smartphone. I've downgraded from previously having 2, one for work and one for personal usage. I have 2 tablets, a desktop, 2 laptops, an Apple Watch, a Fitbit, a Bluetooth-enabled toothbrush, and I have to say collecting data on dental hygiene is actually a very interesting thing to do, but we'll have to save that topic for another webinar. 2 connected TVs and a streaming box. So just by myself, I have 12 connected devices, and that is this year. So you can surely, again, do your own audit on the number of devices that you own and utilize with regularity. But if I was going to bet on it, I'm guessing most folks have far more than 4 devices, and it's unlikely that they have less. Naturally, there's going to be some variance depending on the individual, but the prominence of folks using more and more of these devices and new types of OTT and digital devices just continues to rise. So I think from here, there are some additional specifics that we can tap into as far as why it is that people are using so many more, spending so much more time across these devices and using them more prevalently. So one of those insights is just driven by a surge in mobile activity. Another study that was released also by eMarketer was looking at the average time spent per day with the majority of media types that are available from a screen perspective. And what you'll see here, and we're looking at trend lines from this year through 2020, is that all these other screens that we use prominently, essentially our usage has gone stagnant. Like, we're not using them more. but the only device where we're continuing to see an incline in usage is mobile. So that's where we're seeing an almost 15-minute increase in volume of time spent, as opposed to the other devices, which we're using very significantly, but not necessarily utilizing more of at this time. But as far as the device where there has been an incredibly steep incline in usage, that's something that we are seeing with OTT. So there's been a dramatic rise in the attraction of viewers going ahead and choosing to cut the cord in lieu of using a traditional TV experience or traditional cable experience. More and more individuals are choosing to cut the cord and go ahead and fully invest in connected TV experiences. So here, another reference to a study. In 2018, the number of cord cutters is going to rise to 33 million. And by 2022, 55 million people will not be watching traditional television, which was approximately sizing up to about 1/5 of the U.S. TV watching population. So I think that's a good way of sizing up how dramatic this impact is going to be. And then on the right side of this slide, again, another bar chart that's just showcasing how this increase in cord cutters is, again, adding to the volume of connected device users and just the volume of connected devices that we are tapping into. So we've gone into a lot of different recent research and studies on how much consumers in the U.S. and elsewhere are both using them from a time perspective and having a volume of these devices. Now let's get into the specifics from an advertising or marketing opportunity standpoint, and that's where we're going to lean into what the opportunity is, and that being cross-device targeting. So to start off the conversation, let's just look at a quick definition of what cross-device targeting is. It's the practice of identifying and delivering ads to a specific audience across all of their devices. So it's an omni-channel strategy that enables marketers to reach users with consistent messaging across all their screens, that including desktop, laptop, smartphone, tablet, and connected TVs. So the key to this technology is the device graph. So the simplest way to break it down is that it is an identity management map that's linking all of an individual's devices together. So typically these are built out by way of two different types of data sets, and there are many different technology players out there that have built out these device graphs that are enabling the clustering and the connection of various devices to individuals. But the two most common data sets that are being leveraged to build out these graphs is either probabilistic data and also deterministic data. So a quick definition for each: probabilistic data is data that's generated through a collection of anonymous data points from a user's browsing behaviors and a variety of other data elements that can be captured that are then compared against deterministic data, so that we can say probabilistically the chances are exceptionally high that based on patterns that we're observing, we are seeing that these unique clusters of devices come together with a regularity that suggests that they're owned by a unique individual. And then deterministic data has long been considered that more accurate way of identifying consumers. It's where we determine with certainty that a variety of different devices are owned by a unique individual, because we know that the various inputs that a person puts into a device, like login information, is confirming that in fact, let's say a laptop, a smartphone, and a tablet are all owned by one individual. So I think the most general and kind of obvious example that can be utilized, or relatable example that can be utilized, is login data from, let's say, Facebook or a Gmail or something to that effect, where you would log into multiple devices, and we can go ahead and say that we know that with the consistency with which somebody is tapping in to these various devices with those unique logins, we can go ahead and assume that this is a unique individual. So that those are kind of good examples to illustrate how deterministic data is identified. So device graphs commonly, like I mentioned earlier, use a combination oftentimes of both probabilistic data and deterministic data It really depends on the partner that you're working with, how and in which capacities they're utilizing them, but oftentimes it'll be some combination of both. Here I drill down into some of the more specifics of what that probabilistic data and deterministic data can look like as far as pulling, signals and inputs that ultimately can build out these clusters of unique devices that are owned by individuals. So here, let's take a look at what those signals could be. On the left, from a probabilistic standpoint, that could include cookie data. What is listed here as an acronym, it looks like MAID, but it stands for Mobile Advertising IDs, IP address data, timestamps, and user agent information. So those are the most common probabilistic signals that are utilized. Again, there could be some variance depending upon the device graph partner you work with or that is employing that technology. And then also deterministic data. So what could those actual data points be? It could be hashed email addresses that are linked to cookies, hashed email that is connected to a mobile ad identifier, or hashed phone numbers that are connected to cookies, or hashed mobile ad identifiers that are connected to phone numbers. So many different ways in which that connectivity can take place and ultimately showcase what's being illustrated on the right, seeing who that unique individual, anonymous individual is, and then the various devices that they're utilizing. So what are the benefits of cross-device targeting that we could take advantage of from an advertising standpoint? So we've gone ahead and broken it into 4 key categories. One being the most obvious, but something to take advantage of, is just being able to reach users or an audience of your choice on their desktop, mobile, and tablet device, and frankly also TV. Secondarily, extending the reach of your retargeting audience. More about that later in terms of not just retargeting via the traditional cookie means, but tapping into your cross-device graph so you can extend beyond that cookie data. Third, extending campaign control down to the number of interactions. So when we are not identifying that various devices are owned to a unique or owned by a unique individual, we don't have that same level of control, but that control is afforded to us through the cross-device graph. And then finally, attributing conversions to the appropriate devices so that we're linking and better understanding where conversions are taking place. So to go back to the top, in terms of ways in which we can use these benefits of cross-device targeting, just having that opportunity to maximize retargeting across any audience. So one of those benefits can just be the fact that you can reach an individual across different screens, and you can customize your creative so that it's best and most appropriately fitting that unique user experience, and then seeing what does that receptivity look like. Are we getting different receptivity on desktop versus tablet versus smartphone? Is it the way the creative looks? Are we doing different types of A/B testing? Are we seeing better receptivity via the creative or the device type, time of day, and so on and so forth? So this is really one of the biggest umbrella foundational opportunities that cross-device enables. Additionally, let's get into some of the details around how this audience extension as it relates to retargeting can be enabled through cross-device targeting. So first, we're looking at retargeting in its most traditional capacity, where I am suggesting here on this graph that there are 4 devices, and they're all desktops. And it is desktop A, desktop B, C, and D. And in this capacity, we're suggesting that we are using cookie data that is going to enable us to retarget. But because we are looking at cookie data alone in isolation, it's just enabling us to retarget on that singular device. So in this instance, the cookie data will just say that we can retarget this individual, but just on computer A, just on desktop B, just on desktop C, and so forth. We can't connect to other devices. By comparison, in a cross-device environment, here we're looking at the opportunity to leverage technology that helps us understand that a device can be owned by, 2 devices can be owned by a unique individual. And here we can see that we are identifying that user C owns both a desktop and also a mobile device. So that connection is enabling us to go ahead and serve messages to them both on that desktop and subsequently on that mobile device, and maybe again on that desktop, and so on and so forth. Again, in that same universe, unique user E, we are identifying their mobile device and their desktop. So again, that connection that's enabling that extension. Now, as far as really doing a true extension and this crossover, we're seeing that we're using a combination of the capabilities of retargeting technology, now paired with the technology of cross-device. And here we're seeing actual crossover to extend beyond what we would otherwise do if we're using either one of these things in isolation. So here we're seeing that in the retargeting, via retargeting cookie data, we've identified user C and they have a desktop. But then by extending into the cross-device technology graph, we also have identified that this person, the same individual, has a mobile device, and now we're connecting the two to go ahead and extend so that we are doing an even better job of identifying that individual and leveraging the two technologies to improve our retargeting opportunities. So something really valuable that can just further our ability to retarget. Another thing that we can do is extending that campaign control. So we're just ensuring our ability to say that if we want a frequency cap, what we really need to understand is what are all the devices that are owned by that singular individual or that unique user, so that if, let's say, we want to place a cap of saying we only want to reach a user in a 24-hour period with 3 views, well, then we are going to want to know all the devices that are owned by that person, because alternatively, if we don't do that, we could technically reach them 3 times on their desktop, 3 times on their smartphone, and 3 times on their tablet. So now we're reaching them in a range that far extends outside of the frequency cap that we set, and we're technically wasting impressions on a strategy that we did not actually want to activate against. So again, extending that control in a way that is really meaningful and helping us do a better job of economizing the budgets that we plan to spend on any particular audience. And then crossing over into some of the reporting types, one of them touching on something that I was just speaking to, what do these reports look like, and how can they help us appropriately reach somebody? This can be one of those reports we can pull, which is reach by frequency. So if we, at the end of a campaign, how can we break out our data? So this is, been simplified. Obviously, you're probably going to reach more than 124 individuals and run 124 impressions on a given line item for a campaign, but this is for example purposes. So in that first line, we're saying the volume of people that we've reached with a frequency of 1 is 124 people, and then accordingly, we've gone ahead and won 124 impressions. Secondarily, with a frequency of 6, we have reached 31 individuals, so we went ahead and won 186 impressions. And then finally, at a higher number, what does that look like? How many individuals did we reach, and then how many impressions were won? So just giving this nice breakdown of how many folks we've reached with what frequency, with consideration for the fact that we have that cluster-based data that can help us acknowledge that we've reached this unique individual on a multitude of devices. Another report that is afforded to us is reach by device type. So here we're actually breaking it down so we can see that device level data. So similar to the last report, but now that added layer, how many individuals did we reach on each device just individually? So whether that be desktop, mobile, tablet. Then in combination, how many folks did we reach on a combination of desktop and mobile? So for the purposes of this example, we're saying we reached 122 people on both of those devices, and we got a little over 3,500 impressions. Then in what combination did we get people on desktop and tablet, on mobile and tablet, and then desktop, mobile, and tablet? Again, these are for example purposes, but just to illustrate the fact that you can drill down to that level of specificity. And here we're looking at a report that illustrates that original point that we were speaking to, and it really does a good job of illustrating how incredibly empowering that cross-device extension can be. So on that bottom line, we see if we're just using traditional audience retargeting, for this example, we're saying we could reach 652 individuals based on the targeting parameters we've set, and we were able to win a volume of impressions amounting to a little over 1,100 or 11,500 impressions. But by way of employing the cross-device extension, we're able to reach almost twice the number of individuals. So we reached a little over 1,100, and then we were able to win about 17,800 impressions. So being able to dramatically improve the volume of folks that we reach, and then also retarget. And then here we're looking at a report that highlights what conversion attribution can look like with cross-device versus without cross-device. So here, let's go ahead and just break down this chart. On the far left, we're looking at device in which the impression was served. So where was the ad actually served, whether that be desktop or mobile. And then in the middle, we're seeing it says device in which the conversion occurs. So where does the person finally click before going ahead and, clicking through to a landing page or a secondary environment? And then finally, without or with cross-device technology, where is the device, where is that conversion actually being attributed to? So when we don't employ, cross-device technology, in that second line, and there where it says desktop first, and then it says mobile, it says conversion is not recorded. So without that cross-device technology, the fact that the actual conversion happened on mobile is something that is not even being captured, which has always long been the concern associated with mobile, that conversions could be occurring but not being properly attributed for. In that second to last line, or rather that last line where it says without cross-device, again, we're seeing that issue where it says that the device in which the conversion occurred was desktop, but again, because of the lack of connectivity that cookies enable, we're not able to properly attribute where the conversion came from. By comparison, when we're employing cross-device technology, here we're seeing we're doing desktop to desktop, desktop to mobile, and mobile to tablet. Here we're able to better attribute the conversion because the technology enables us to do so. And then also just a more generalized breakdown, there's many different ways to break out these reports, but here we're just illustrating that, based on the volume of impressions you run and how many folks have been reached on either individual devices, whether that be mobile or desktop, or a multitude of devices, so we reach them on many different devices, we can capture and see how many impressions were served and where conversions ultimately happened as well. Also, as it relates to being able to activate this technology from a programmatic standpoint, just like a shout out to something that we're able to enable through Centro's DSP and Basis platform opportunities. It's really quite simple to activate something like this in a programmatic environment. These technologies are not just offered in a vacuum from a managed service perspective. You can activate them yourself. And it can be as simplistic as just hitting a button that says enabling cross-device, and then there being either a default setting of what that frequency cap looks like, or you manually setting it to what you're seeking it to be based on your campaign goals. And then from a best practices standpoint, just like with anything, there are a couple of things to keep in mind as it relates to cross-device. First and foremost, just like making sure you're identifying your campaign goals and making sure that they align with what the technology has to offer. And then just capitalizing on some of these unique targeting opportunities, right? Like there are multiple things that we discussed today that can be enabled, whether it's extending that reach, whether it's the frequency capping, whether it's something like a sequential targeting. So maybe you don't just want to serve variations of a creative that are all the same, but do you want to serve something where after I serve something on my mobile device and we know that that's been viewed, do I want to serve them a secondary message that's a little bit different? Maybe that's a step beyond what was initially served to them for that first exposure. So we're continuing the conversation, but it's a little bit removed from what that initial impression was. And then subsequent to that, what else can we do from a best practices standpoint? Analyze the available data. All this information is coming through, and it can help inform how you want to serve messages in the future. So that's something to definitely keep in mind given the variety of reports that can be offered. And then finally, optimizing creative for each screen, knowing that people receive messaging differently based on how they consume information on that screen, the time of day, the type of message that was shared, the format that it was shared in. That's all something that's unique and really interesting to really bring new, robust insight to how it is that you are reflecting on how your campaign performed and how you can do even better from an optimization standpoint in the future. So from a takeaways perspective, or really from a recap perspective, as far as the things you can activate here, it's a combination of being able to quickly take advantage of frequency capping, leveraging the technology that employs this improved audience extension, having the opportunity to gather that conversion attribution information, and then finally having a variety of different reports that you can generate programmatically. And that is essentially it.
Nor, that was great. Thank you so much for that. Before we jump into questions, I just want to call out, I know a handful of you have already found it throughout the presentation, but go to that questions tab and plug in any questions that maybe you scribbled down or that as the wheels are turning that you're thinking about that we're able to answer real time for you. Hopefully we'll be able to get through all the questions that have been submitted and that are being submitted right now. I see a couple more coming through, which is great. Otherwise, we'll follow up with you all just to make sure that we're able to address each and every one of them. Just to kind of kick things off here, Noor, here's one. How can you assess the accuracy of a cross-device graph?
Yeah, absolutely. So, once upon a time when cross-device graphs originally came to fruition, I want to say now, like in many cases, 6-7 years ago, frankly, like cross-device graph technology was in a black box and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to ask many questions. But now I think, more of the players that are in the space are open to asking appropriate questions, and also they're working with third parties to see what the accuracy looks like as it relates to associating that probabilistic data with deterministic data sets and seeing, how often are we seeing that accuracy of individuals being clustered together. So asking them, like, for instance, what's your match rate? How often are you matching together a multitude of devices? One of the things about cross-device graphs is that every single individual that you find inside of the graph isn't necessarily going to be linked to 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 devices. So getting a sensibility of, how often are we seeing that linkage take place? That's an interesting question to go ahead and ask. I think another important question to put out there is if there's a multitude of data points and data providers that they're working with, how many of them can they share back with you so you can get a sensibility of who it is that they're working with? Are they working with prevalent and prominent data partners out there? And how are they linking that data together to build out their clusters? Another important piece of information to ask for. And then subsequent to that, there was one other important point I wanted to bring up as it relates to that connectivity. But it's going to come back to me, Ryan. I just had kind of a mind blank there, but there's a third point, and it'll come back to me, and we'll send that out to everyone.
Yeah, it's good. We've got a bunch of questions, so we can kind of move on to the next. There's actually a few that were submitted around this, kind of framed different ways of when should cross-device targeting be utilized, or is there a scenario when you wouldn't want to enable cross-device targeting? Maybe kind of talk through that.
Yeah. So I think, something to always keep in mind is that, understanding the reason why you're activating something. Like, do these opportunities that the technology employ, do they actually offer value for what it is that you're looking for, the consumer to act on? So is there an actual added benefit to being able to serve messages to the same individual on all these devices? Yes, there's this overarching consumer insight where there is value, but would it make more sense in some instances to, based on whatever previous campaigns you run or based on data that you have available to you, Does it maybe not make sense to employ this technology? Is it in some way inhibiting the number of impressions that you can reach for your audience? Like there's some different factors to keep in mind. If you are, taking consideration for, the audience that you're seeking to reach, if you are working with, let's say, a programmatic buyer who's buying on your behalf, getting a sense from them as well, based on your unique audience, to see if there could be any inhibition to how you're able to effectively reach your audience when employing this added data layer. That's something to put out in front of your buyer as well.
That's great. And there's a somewhat of a follow-up question. You kind of talked through it there, but just because this one was a little bit more specific about cross-screen targeting, how should it look when you've got a product that's maybe only offered on one device? And the example that he's giving is that he's got a mobile app. So, how important is it to incorporate? Would you want to utilize, or would that be a scenario that you wouldn't?
That is such a perfect question, and incidentally, that's what I think my mind, as it mind blanked, I was thinking of that exact type of question being asked, and if that is the perfect scenario in which to employ or not employ. And I think there's like a multitude of questions to bring there. So let's talk very specifically about like an app download driving or app install driving campaign. It depends on like what part of the funnel you're looking to reach people in. Like if you're doing something that's branding based, well, then it might make sense because maybe you're looking to just familiarize people with the fact that, a new app is available or new updates are available or there's new, ways in which you can engage or functionality and so forth. Then from a branding perspective, it could make sense because, like, let's say on YouTube, for instance, where many people do continue to access YouTube on a combination of desktop and also on mobile, introducing people to an app so that they can get informed on it, it still makes sense. But if you're only looking to drive downloads and you feel like there's pretty good market awareness, then yes, in an alternative instance, it may only make sense to reach people on a mobile device because your goals are aligned to having that download happen, which can only happen on a smartphone, let's say, or tablet.
Sure. Yeah. What about first and third party audience data? Are you able to apply those across the IDs when you are connected to when you're connected to the device graph?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sorry if like the sound of sirens is coming to people over the phone. On a.
It's like the real Chicago fire right there for everybody that's not been in Chicago.
Absolutely.
In the live.
You absolutely can append first and third party audience data across IDs via a device graph. And I think the thing that really employs that opportunity is the fact that these opportunities are now programmatically available. So being able to see, when you layer on that additional data with the appropriate, technology and programmatic partner, for instance, like with Basis, that's something that we are enabled to do. You can see how, by adding those additional data layers, are we seeing, significant restrictions on the volume of impressions we're able to run, or is that limitation something that actually empowers your campaign and ensures that you're reaching an even more appropriate audience? So yes, the opportunity is definitely there.
Great. And we did have a couple of people ask if you're all right. And if you haven't been to our Chicago headquarters before, where Nora is right now, there's some busy main streets around there. So we hear the fire truck. So Nora is okay. She is safe and sound. Before we move on to the next question here. Here's one that I know is near and dear to your heart, Nora, talking about some of the problems and challenges with mobile and conversions. I know you kind of talked about some of the conversion tracking as it relates to cross-device and kind of the retargeting aspects of it, but maybe if you could spend a little bit more time about some of the challenges there.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that cookie perspective, this has been, especially for myself, I once worked in a mobile-only role at Centro where I was just really somebody out there evangelizing the importance of mobile. But a big question that people consistently brought to the table was that I get it. A lot of people have these mobile devices and yes, they're interacting with them. But when I can't capture this conversion information because of these issues with the cookie not being able to cross over appropriately and be spoken for, it's really not looking so great on my campaign. So I do think this is one of the beautiful things about the cross-device data, is that it's one of the means by which we can go ahead and overreach some of the issues that we have when we're looking at mobile, when that cookie information otherwise is broken and we can't do that appropriate attribution. To go back to an earlier point that I was making as far as working with different cross-device graph technology partners, and you need to ask the question of what does that match rate look like? How often are you finding individuals with a multitude of devices? Cross-device technology is also something that is not perfect. 100% of the time, you're not always bridging that gap with the tech that is available out there. So it is a solution that can be leaned into, but it's definitely still not a perfect one. So I do think that there will continue to be improvements that exist there so that we can see even stronger and stronger conversion data that is appropriately linking back to conversions taking place on mobile.
Awesome. Well, great. Well, we had many questions that we were not able to get to, which I apologize to you all. Great content, great questions, lots of curiosity and interest. We'll make sure we'll follow up with you guys individually to answer those questions. So, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Noor, for this great presentation. Very much appreciate it. Again, a shout out, as I mentioned earlier on the call, that the slides used today and a recording of this will be sent out to you via email. And we'll also see when the webinar ends a survey. And we really appreciate you guys giving us feedback on your experience, your thoughts, recommendations for future webinars. So be on the lookout for the information about the slides and the recording, but also information about updates on the upcoming Centro Institute webinar in October. So if we go to the next slide here, we're going to be talking about conversational interfaces. So everything from chatbots to digital assistants and that whole fun world, and talking a little bit about the evolution, where things were and kind of where they're at today, and also where we think that they're going. So very exciting presentation next month. That will be October 24th. But again, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Noor. I'm Ryan Manchi. This has been the webinar series brought to you by Centro Institute, and we're glad you joined us. Thanks, all.